In my last video, I took a closer look at FSU's new quarterback, DJ Uiagalelei. Despite the common narrative that the journeyman college quarterback has plateaued, he took a small but significant step forward in terms of passer efficiency every year he's been a starter. I showed that some portion of that improvement probably was a result of a quarterback-friendly system at Oregon State. They did things like prioritize under-center snaps and play action, both things that tend to improve the efficiency of any quarterback and seem to have a particularly large effect for DJ. So I think we can account for his improvement at Clemson, since it was his first year and he naturally improved as a young quarterback with more reps. But it is surprising for an established quarterback to go to a brand new team with arguably less talent around him and thrive, even factoring in the friendlier offensive system. But not so fast, my friend. Is it a given that he was in a better situation at Clemson than Oregon State? Well, that's not an easy question to answer. I mean, the recruiting rankings say that Clemson's better, but are they? The stats nerds for baseball and basketball have developed a handy statistic that kind of answers this, called wins above replacement, or WAR. This is an attempt to measure how much better a player is compared to an average player at that position. Usually you can do this by comparing how well a team does without that player on the field or court, but that doesn't really work with football. It has too small of a sample size, especially for quarterbacks. There are very few reps without them on the field, and the ones that exist are usually in garbage time against subpar opponents. So how can we answer the question of how much surrounding talent helped DJ? Since we can't compare with the same team, we can turn to our second best option, comparing to the teams either immediately before or immediately after he played for them. When we do that, we see something encouraging. Clemson's offense dropped from the 46th best to the 56th best per F+, an advanced metric. Meanwhile, Oregon State's offense improved 15 spots from 31 to 16. Now, these stats are incredibly noisy. It doesn't account for changes in personnel or coaching staff, but I think there's still something to take away from this. He made two separate teams better, and not by insignificant margins. To me, that's proof that he's a quarterback that can at least lead an efficient offense. Now let's move on to the question of whether he was actually surrounded by a better team at Clemson compared to Oregon State. Well, even that's a bit of a bad question to ask. These teams didn't play the same schedule. Who you play against matters as much as the team around you. To take the argument to its most extreme, any player would have an easier time on an average Pee Wee team than they would on a great NFL team, right? Two other quarterbacks moved out to the Pac-12 from other power conferences in the same time frame in Michael Penix and Bo Nix, and they both saw significant jumps in efficiency. So how do we try to control for these things? Well, I can see if he had more time to throw at Oregon State or Clemson, which would tell me if he had a better offensive line relative to competition. When we look at these, you can tell the numbers are remarkably similar. The time to pressure, which I think is the most telling stat of offensive line performance, since it takes the release time completely out of the equation, is basically the same between both teams. However, a closer look shows that he was blitzed significantly more at Oregon State to get the same amount of time to pressure. That means Oregon State's line was able to hold for the same amount of time against more rushers, which means he had the same amount of time to attack less coverage defenders. So I would actually give Oregon State's line the advantage over Clemson in this case. The other most important surrounding players are his receivers. On the surface, this seems like an obvious question. Clemson has been the home to some of the best college receivers in the past 10 years. Surely those athletes were better than what he was passing to in his time in Corvallis. Well, to get into that conversation, we first have to talk about completion percentage. A common refrain from opponents of DJ is his relatively low completion percentage. He usually lives in the high 50s to low 60s in this category, which admittedly isn't very good. But it's not as bad as you might think. The thing is, every throw isn't made the same. Deep passes are harder to complete, but affect games a lot more when they're completed. If you chart average air yards against completion percentage, you can see that he is below the trend line, but not enough to be a huge concern in my opinion. Because of this difference, his completion percentage dropped in his time at Oregon State, since his average air yards jumped from 8-ish to 10-ish yards. However, these rates are still similar enough that we can compare the reasons for incompletions between the two seasons. PFF is nice enough to track this data to give an idea of why things went wrong in general. While these stats aren't entirely reliable on a down-to-down basis, I think they give a good idea over a season's worth of data points. You can see the uptick in inaccurate throws at Oregon State, which is to be expected considering he was pushing the ball further downfield on average. But what I want to point your attention to is this category. The percentage of incompletions due to receiver error was significantly higher at Clemson, sitting at about 19% compared to the 14% at Oregon State. So in my estimation, he was getting more help with the offensive line and the receivers in his time at Oregon State. Not exactly the most encouraging sign as an FSU fan, where there is a lot of questions in the wide receiver room. Despite this, that Clemson team won 11 games that season and the ACC championship, although to be fair, Cade Klubnik did start that game. Okay, now on to something else I noticed when looking through DJ's game. I noticed a weird trend when looking at his passing bends. Take a second to see if you can find the same idea. When throwing downfield, it seems like he's a worse passer to the right than he is to the left, especially in this 0 to 10 yard region. Before I ran away with this idea, I did check and it is not a nationally observed thing. It's pretty unique to DJ. So now that I've bored you with all the stat talk, we can finally get into some film to see why this might be. This is what I found. DJ's longer arm action tends to mess up the timing of his throws a little bit, especially in the short region. I think when he throws to the left, you can see that he has to reset his feet. And when he does that, he tends to really open that front foot up. This allows his hips to get better clearance and honestly just allows his arm more time to catch up to his lower body. When he throws to the right, he either doesn't move his feet much at all, or when he does, he oversteps a bit, which closes that front side. Both of these options shorten his hip rotation and speed up his lower body. The outcome of which is you can see his upper body start to travel forward as the arm drags behind. This can lead to more variation in the trajectory of the ball. At Oregon State, it feels like they tried to address this in the opposite way you might think. His motion actually seems a bit longer here, and I actually think that works. It seems at Clemson, the cue was to shorten his motion, and I think instead of speeding up the upper body mechanics, it kind of just made him rush his lower half. At Oregon State, he seems to be in less of a hurry. His hips have time to travel through, the motion in his arm has time to catch up. I think these freeze frames show the difference pretty well. In the Oregon State clip, after release, you can see the back leg is naturally traveling forward with momentum, whereas with Clemson, it was kind of dragging behind. If I was his coach, I would be trying to decouple his lower body mechanics from his upper body, challenge him to throw off platform, and emphasize light feet in the pocket that would allow for him to keep that open stance when delivering to the right side. And I do think that has been an emphasis at FSU, but only time will tell. Now, I feel like I've been pretty pessimistic about DJ in these videos. Yeah, I think a lot of the improvement over last season has more to do with scheme and surrounding talent than him taking a huge jump individually, but I don't think that should be a huge surprise or even a death knell for the Noles. The dude can ball on a good day, and to reinforce that, I want to take a look at what I think is his most encouraging game as a starter, his 2022 matchup against a really good Wake Forest team. Okay, so Clemson's makeup that season wasn't entirely dissimilar to FSU's this year. They were a run-first team with DJ behind the helm. One of the best weapons a defense has against a run-first team is cover 3. In cover 3, one of the safeties rolls up into the box to have one more person available to stop the run at the expense of losing a deep defender. That means that these seams are a weak point, but most colleges can get away with this because the safety can usually help cover both. The problem comes when they face a strong-armed quarterback. DJ is able to rifle this ball between the backer and the deep safety for a big chunk play. Here's another play that fits the same idea. Clemson is running slot fade, which generally isn't great against cover 3 since the fade runs right into this deep third defender. However, this corner is expecting inside help, so he plays outside to funnel a deep throw back inside. Clemson here runs this tight end over the middle to distract the middle safety just long enough for DJ to throw a 40-yard missile between him and the corner. There aren't many college quarterbacks making this throw. Okay, now you've hit them in that seam a few times, and Wake is beginning to adjust. This play is a 3rd and 5, and you can see Wake's underneath defenders are so worried about protecting this deep seam that they're all dropping pretty deep. This guy in particular is 15 yards off the line. That makes ample room for DJ to pick up the first down using his legs. It also opens up underneath throws like this slant. And it can even open up space for him to make a throw on this deep comeback, which is an NFL level throw if he can make it consistently. So you can throw a team out of cover 3. What do they do next? Well, they can go cover 4, but that has its own drawbacks. But more likely than not, you'll start to see man coverage. You can attack this by throwing dots over the top using slot fades, like this throw here, or you can take this for what it is, an admission that they're willing to give up the run. DJ is a good college player. I think he has a few too many lapses in his game to be a Heisman level player, but he's a guy that decided to spend his last season bridging the gap for some young talented quarterbacks and act as a foundation for a team that really didn't have an identity after losing a lot of talent off of that last team. For that, I'm thankful and excited to see what he can do in garnet and gold. Thanks for watching. This is a crazy fall for me, so the channel might look a little bit different this season. I'm going to be limited on making solo videos like this one, so my typical opponent previews will most likely be a joint venture with Coach AB, a little like the Georgia Tech previews we've been doing. I hope to still get videos out for big games, but I appreciate the patience. Hopefully this is just a limitation for this season and we'll be back to full capacity and more next fall. With all that, it helps to like and subscribe and follow me over to Knowles247 for more content. Thanks.